brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Mark David Chapman. Mark David Chapman is an American celebrity killer who murdered John Lennon in New York City on December 8, 1980. Chapman shot Lennon outside the Dakota apartment building in Manhattan. Chapman fired 5 times at Lennon, hitting him 4 times in the back. Chapman remained at the crime scene and began reading J.D. Salinger's novel The Catcher in the Rye until the police arrived and arrested him. He repeatedly said that the novel was his statement. Chapman's legal team intended to mount an insanity defense based on expert testimony that he was in a delusional psychotic state at the time of the killing. As the trial approached, Chapman instructed his lawyers that he wanted to plead guilty, based on what he had decided was the will of God. The judge allowed the plea change without further psychiatric assessment after Chapman denied hearing voices, and sentenced him to a prison term of 20 years to life, with a stipulation that mental health treatment be provided. Chapman has been imprisoned since the murder and has been denied parole 9 times amidst campaigns against his release. Personal background. Mark David Chapman was born on May 10, 1955 in Fort Worth, Texas. His father, David Chapman, was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Air Force, and his mother, Diane, was a nurse. His younger sister, Susan, was born 7 years later. Chapman stated that as a boy, he lived in fear of his father, who he said was physically abusive towards his mother and unloving towards him. Chapman began to fantasize about having king-like power over a group of imaginary, little people, who lived in the walls of his bedroom. Chapman attended Columbia High School in Dakota, Georgia. By the time he was 14, Chapman was using drugs, skipping classes, and he once ran away from home to live on the streets of Atlanta for 2 weeks. He said that he was bullied at school because he was not a good athlete. In 1971, Chapman became a born-again Presbyterian and distributed biblical tracts. He met his first girlfriend, Jessica Blankenship. He began work as a YMCA summer camp counselor. He was very popular with the children, who nicknamed him Nemo. He won an award for Outstanding Counselor and was made assistant director. Those who knew him in the caretaking professions unanimously called him an outstanding worker. A friend recommended The Catcher in the Rye to Chapman, and the story eventually took on great personal significance for him, to the extent that he reportedly wished to model his life after its protagonist, Holden Caulfield. After graduating from Columbia High School, Chapman moved for a time to Chicago and played guitar in churches and Christian night spots while his friend did impersonations. He worked successfully for World Vision with Vietnamese refugees at a resettlement camp at Fort Chaffee in Arkansas, after a brief visit to Lebanon for the same work. He was named an area coordinator and a key aide to the program director, David Moore, who later said that Chapman cared deeply for the children and worked hard. Chapman accompanied Moore to meetings with government officials, and President Gerald Ford shook his hand. Chapman joined his girlfriend, Jessica Blankenship, as a student at Covenant College, an evangelical Presbyterian liberal arts college in Lookout Mountain, Georgia. However, Chapman fell behind in his studies and became obsessed with guilt over having an affair. He started having suicidal thoughts and began to feel like a failure. He dropped out of Covenant College after just 1 semester, and his girlfriend broke off their relationship soon after. He returned to work at the resettlement camp, but left after an argument. Chapman worked as a security guard, eventually taking a week-long course to qualify as an armed guard. He again attempted college, but dropped out. He went to Hawaii and then began contemplating suicide. In 1977, Chapman attempted suicide by carbon monoxide asphyxiation. He connected a hose to his car's exhaust pipe, but the hose melted and the attempt failed. A psychiatrist admitted him to Castle Memorial Hospital for clinical depression. Upon his release, he began working at the hospital. His parents began divorce proceedings, and his mother joined Chapman in Hawaii. In 1978, Chapman went on a 6-week trip around the world, inspired partly by the film Around the World in 80 Days. He visited Tokyo, Seoul, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bangkok, Delhi, Beirut, Geneva, London, Paris and Dublin. He began a relationship with his travel agent, a Japanese-American woman named Gloria Abe. They married on June 2, 1979. Chapman went to work at Castle Memorial Hospital as a printer, working alone rather than with staff and patients. He was fired by the Castle Memorial Hospital, rehired, then got into a shouting match with a nurse and quit. He took a job as a night security guard and began drinking heavily. Chapman developed a series of obsessions, including artwork, The Catcher in the Rye, music, and John Lennon. In September 1980, he wrote a letter to a friend, Linda Irish, in which he stated, "I'm going nuts." He signed the letter, "The Catcher in the Rye." Chapman had no criminal convictions up to this point. Plan to murder John Lennon. Chapman allegedly started planning to kill Lennon 3 months prior to the murder. He had been a big Beatles fan who idolized Lennon. Chapman played the guitar himself, but turned against Lennon after he became a Christian. He was angered at Lennon's comment that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. In the South, there were demonstrations, album burnings, boycotts, and projectiles were thrown. Some members of Chapman's prayer group made a joke in reference to Lennon's song, Imagine. It went, "Imagine, imagine if John Lennon was dead." Chapman's childhood friend Miles McManus recalls his referring to the song as communist. Jan Reeves, sister of one of Chapman's best friends, reports that Chapman seemed really angry toward John Lennon, and he kept saying he could not understand why John Lennon had said it, that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. According to Mark, there should be nobody more popular than the Lord Jesus Christ. He said it was blasphemy. Chapman had later also been influenced by reading in a library book about Lennon's life in New York. According to his wife Gloria, he was angry that Lennon would preach love and peace, but yet have millions of dollars. Chapman later said that, "He told us to imagine no possessions, and there he was, with millions of dollars and yachts and farms and country estates, laughing at people like me who had believed the lies and bought the records, and built a big part of their lives around his music." He said that he chose Lennon after seeing him on the cover of the Beatles album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. He also recalled having listened to Lennon's John Lennon, Plastic Ono Band album in the weeks before the murder and has stated, "I would listen to this music and I would get angry at him for saying that he didn't believe in God, and that he didn't believe in the Beatles. This was another thing that angered me, even though this record had been done at least 10 years previously. I just wanted to scream out loud, who does he think he is? Saying these things about God and heaven and the Beatles, saying that he doesn't believe in Jesus, and things like that." At that point, my mind was going through a total blackness of anger and rage. So I brought the Lennon book home, into this The Catcher in the Rye milieu, where my mindset is Holden Caulfield and anti-phoniness. Chapman also said that he had a hit list of people in mind, including David Bowie, Johnny Carson, Marlon Brando, Walter Cronkite, Elizabeth Taylor, George C. Scott and Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. But John Lennon seemed to be the easiest to find. He separately said that he was particularly infatuated by Lennon. Chapman's planning has been described as muddled. Chapman went to New York in October 1980, intending to kill Lennon. He left in order to obtain ammunition from his unwitting friend in Atlanta, Dana Reeves, and returned to New York in November. After being inspired by the film Ordinary People, Chapman returned to Hawaii, telling his wife he had been obsessed with killing Lennon. He showed her the gun and bullets, but she did not inform the police or mental health services. He made an appointment to see a clinical psychologist, but before it occurred he flew back to New York on December 6, 1980. At one point, he considered committing suicide by jumping from the Statue of Liberty. Chapman says that the message, "Thou shalt not kill," flashed on the TV at him, and was also on a wall hanging put up by his wife in their apartment. On the night before the murder, Chapman and his wife discussed on the phone about getting help with his problems by first working on his relationship with God. On the day before the killing, Chapman accosted singer-songwriter James Taylor at the 72nd Street subway station. According to Taylor, the guy had sort of pinned me to the wall and was glistening with maniacal sweat and talking some freak speak about what he was going to do and his stuff, with how John was interested, and he was going to get in touch with John Lennon. He also reportedly offered cocaine to a taxi driver. On the day of the murder, David Bowie was appearing on Broadway in the play The Elephant Man. "I was second on his list," Bowie later said. Chapman had a front-row ticket to The Elephant Man the next night. John and Yoko were supposed to sit front row for that show, too. So the night after John was killed there were 3 empty seats in the front row. "I can't tell you how difficult that was to go on. I almost didn't make it through the performance." Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.